The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. Everyone knows drinking and driving is dangerous. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving have done an amazing job through the years to make sure everyone knows that. Now, on a cold, snowy night in Massachusetts, Karen Reed was out drinking with her boyfriend. She was driving, and prosecutors say when she dropped him off, she struck him with the back of her SUV. But prosecutors don't think it's an accident. They say it's murder. Now, I've covered this case in depth on my weeknight show, Closing Arguments, and what you're about to see are some of the most important moments from that program as I investigate the tragic death of Officer John O'Keefe. They show up wearing pink, some of them holding signs. They line the streets cheering on a woman named Karen Reed. She's not a celebrity. She's not a war hero. She's a college professor accused of murdering a Boston police officer named John O'Keefe. John and Karen were a couple who were practically living together. But on the night of January 28th, going into the early mornings of the 29th, they were out together. First at C.F. McCarthy's in downtown Canton, Massachusetts. Then at the Waterfall Bar. And finally, inside Karen's SUV in front of Brian Albert's house, who was having an after party with a bunch of the folks who were at the waterfall. The big question is, what happened to John O'Keefe after he stepped out of Karen's car? Prosecutors say she backed over him on purpose and drove away, leaving him in the snow to die. Karen says that's not true and believes John went into that after party, got ambushed, and was placed onto the front lawn to die in the cold. She also believes the people in the house, along with state and local police, framed her for John's murder. Tonight, we are live from the courthouse where the jury saw videos from inside the bars today. What do they show? What do they prove? We'll bring in our experts to answer those questions as we continue our investigation into the tragic death of Officer John O'Keefe. I want to bring in a special guest joining us in Southborough, Massachusetts, DUI expert and attorney Brian Simoneau. Brian, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Great to have you on the program.
My pleasure, Vinnie. Great to be here.
Okay, I want to go through some of the information that we have. Obviously, we'll get more as this trial continues, actually put on the record. But let's talk about the level of intoxication or potential intoxication and what information is needed to determine this for the jury. Let's start with John O'Keefe that night. We know he's about 6'2", about 220 pounds. Testimony about plus or minus 6 beers at C.F. McCarthy's when he's there for a couple hours, starting at 7:40, is seen with an alcoholic drink or a beer in his hand at the Waterfall Bar and Grill from 11 to 12. So at a minimum, we're looking at, maybe 6 or 7 drinks in that time frame. 6'2", 220. What information would you need, and do you think they'll be able to determine his level of intoxication at the time of his death?
Yeah, so standard protocol in a case like this is that they will take blood. I'm sure they took blood as part of the autopsy. I'm not sure, because he was frozen out in the cold for so long, how productive that blood test will be. But a blood draw obviously is part of the postmortem examination, and I'm sure that was done, and that will hopefully yield some result. I don't know what that will be. We'll see as the evidence comes in. I know the medical examiner is going to testify, and his blood alcohol content will certainly be part of this. But more importantly is obviously the defendant's blood alcohol content, Karen Reed's BAC. She's charged with manslaughter by operating under the influence, and the blood alcohol content is obviously part of that. They need to prove that she was under the influence at approximately 12:45 a.m. when she allegedly struck Mr. O'Keefe.
Yeah, so let's put that up on the board. Some of the information that we know, and we got some information here, could be off by a little bit, but it's from a trusted source. She's about 5'4", about 98 pounds or so. Her ethanol results from the blood reading on January 29th at 9:08 is 93 mg/dLs. I don't know what that stands for, right. Milligrams per something, right? Now,
it stands for milligrams per deciliter.
Okay. Does that number mean something to you? That number, that 93?
Yeah, it does.
Explain to us what it means to you.
Sure. So what they're saying is that's her BAC based on the blood that was drawn. And that blood was drawn at approximately, I want to say, 9:08 a.m. is when that blood was drawn from the Good Samaritan Hospital. She's alleged to have struck Officer O'Keefe with her vehicle at approximately 12:45 p.m. So the question is, what was her blood alcohol level at 12:45 p.m.? And the way the Commonwealth is going to try to prove that is with an expert witness and what's called retrograde extrapolation, which is basically fancy language for taking her BAC at a known time, which is when the blood was drawn at 9:08 a.m., and then working backwards using what's called the Woodmark formula to determine what her blood was at the time that Officer O'Keefe was allegedly struck, which was 12:45 a.m.
Okay, let's put on the screen what the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab toxicologist is talking about here. Performed a serum conversion and retrograde extrapolation, just like you said. Their opinion, or his opinion, Karen Reed's blood alcohol at 9:08 on the 29th was between 0.07 and 0.08 from his serum conversion analysis, and gives an estimate that her blood alcohol at 12:45 a.m. would have been between, and this is a pretty big range, 0.13 and 0.29%. So first of all, tell us the significance of these numbers and what they mean in terms of how someone is acting and how they can drive, et cetera, when you're talking about 0.07 to 0.08 versus 0.13 to 0.29.
So 0.08 is the legal limit in Massachusetts, and that's the Commonwealth's burden is to prove that she was operating at that level, which would mean that she was under the influence. But obviously, there's a huge range between a 0.13 and a 0.29, and that is based on extrapolation done by a blood test taken 8.5 hours after the incident. So that's a lot of time to have to account for. And the Commonwealth filed a motion to admit this evidence, this retrograde extrapolation evidence. The defense is objecting to that. The judge hasn't ruled on that. If I were to predict, I believe she will allow it to come in, but I think they're going to have some issues. This will be another so-called battle of the experts, not only with respect to the blood retrograde extrapolation, but how it was collected. I don't think it might not have been collected the way that evidentiary blood would be collected. So I think that's going to be another challenge. But yeah, 0.13 to 0.29 is a huge range. I think at that level, you're definitely exhibiting signs and symptoms of intoxication, glassy bloodshot eyes, slurred speech, difficulty, with thought processes and things of that nature. And I didn't hear any testimony to that effect from the police officers who first encountered her. She was distraught, she was hysterical, but I didn't hear any sort of telltale signs of being under the influence, glassy bloodshot eyes or anything like that. And I don't think there was any testimony today. The bartender who actually served the drinks says that, she was not inebriated, she was not overserved, she was not exhibiting signs of alcohol intoxication when she left the bar.
Coming up next.
They were affectionate toward each other, loving toward each other, to the point where my wife even made a comment, why are you not like that with me?
This is true crime all the time.
We are live in courtrooms across the country.
We continue our gavel-to-gavel coverage.
This is what I love to do.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Surveillance cameras are everywhere and capture images of us almost every time we leave our homes. Karen Reed was captured on camera at the bars she was drinking at the night her boyfriend John O'Keefe died. Here's more of our investigation.
You saw in the video when Miss Reed actually walked into the location how Miss Reed and Mr. O'Keefe greeted each other. It appeared that was quite an affectionate greeting. Would you agree?
Objection.
Do you agree with that?
They kissed, yeah.
Would you consider a kiss affectionate?
Yes.
They hugged each other, correct?
I don't recall.
They seemed happy to see each other.
Yes.
You didn't observe while you were at CF McCarthy's with them, you didn't observe any arguing or bickering between the two of them?
No.
As a matter of fact, they were sort of the normal, affectionate, laughing, happy couple that you were used to seeing, correct?
Yes.
There didn't seem to be any tension between them at CF McCarthy's, is that right?
Not that I recall.
So that's at CF McCarthy's. That's the first bar that John and Karen are at. They're there together for about 2 hours, and they go across the street to the waterfall. And again, another one of John O'Keefe's friends witnessing how these two are interacting. Let's take a listen.
You knew that Mr. O'Keefe and Miss Reed had rekindled a previous relationship from years earlier.
Yes, I did. They were affectionate toward each other, loving towards each other, and to the point where my wife even made a comment, why are you not like that with me?
That's just 1 hour. 1 hour before the murder. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us, criminal defense attorney Joseph Krowski Jr. Also joining us, Karen Reed supporter and expert Nick Rocco. And YouTube creator behind Yellow Cottage Tales, Kevin Lanahan, is with us as well. Great to see everyone tonight. Joseph, I'll start with you. What are you seeing in the bar? I mean, this is 1 hour before an alleged murder, and everyone's saying, you know, the wife is saying, I wish you were more like John and Karen.
My wife says the same thing. Look, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing really a tragedy. It looks to me like this was a lot of good people having a good night. You know, they're police officers. They should have a cautionary tale. They should have known you don't mix alcohol and getting into a car. But I will say you had an excellent guest on last week that talked about this should have never been charged as a murder case. And I think any suggestion that there was going to be compelling, overwhelming evidence of a hostile relationship and motive for Karen Reed to kill John O'Keefe was basically washed out the door today. Nothing that the niece and nephew can say are going to change that. But likewise, the same people that are outraged that Karen Reed is accused of killing someone have absolutely defamed and disparaged people like Jen McCabe. She was in those videos as well. She was hugging Karen Reed. She was interacting with everyone. All of them were interacting with one another. So the suggestion that Karen Reed committed a murder, I think, is absurd. Likewise, the suggestion that anyone in that house committed a murder is absurd. The glass is interesting because, look,
we'll get to the glass in a second, Joseph. We'll get to it in a second.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's fine. I love the passion. We all love the passion. Nick Rocco, your thoughts?
I mean, we all heard it today. The Commonwealth was trying to bring this theory forward that there was a toxic relationship, and everybody on the stand today who witnessed them that night said no bickering. They were lovey-dovey. One woman wishes her husband acted the way that John was acting towards Karen. I mean, as far as them breaking up and quote-unquote, Lally says, what happens behind closed doors, what all the witnesses said today is going to prove, and just like Joe said, no matter what the kids say on stand, their relationship was not falling apart. They were excited for a vacation they were going on. She was speaking very highly of John. So you want the people to believe that a 5-minute drive from the Waterfall Bar to 34 Fairview went from lovey-dovey to I'm going to kill you? Don't think so.
Kevin?
I think it adds to the state's credibility here that they're bringing forth witnesses not to just push a very black and white narrative, but to give you the truth. So another thing that we noticed here is last summer, Karen said that she was not invited to the house and wasn't even sure that she heard that anybody was invited to the house. But we heard testimony today that she was specifically invited, in fact, by Jen McCabe, and that everybody there was invited. So there goes the idea that the defense opened up by saying that John was ambushed in that invite. No. Everybody was invited to the after-hours party.
Well, let's take a listen to testimony from one of John's friends talking about that invitation.
There was discussion about, well, I think Jen McCabe brought up, let's go to my sister's house.
And is that somewhere that you or your husband, to your knowledge, had ever been to before?
We had never been to her house before, no.
And was that something that was sort of a private invitation, or was that sort of open to the group at the table?
I think it was said out loud, like, hey, anybody wants to go, we can go to my sister's on Fairview. I wasn't specifically invited myself. I just think it was put out there.
And did either yourself or your husband take anyone up on an invitation? Did you go to Fairview after the waterfall?
We did not go. I actually said to him, there's no way we're going anywhere. We're going home. Karen went over to John, something like that. He like put his arm around her. I don't know if they had a conversation, they talked. It seemed like they were like quite lovey-dovey at that point. And then that's when Jennifer McCabe went up to Karen and said, you're coming with me. Like, and she like grabbed her, like she put her arm around her and she said in front of me, she's like, you're coming with me, you're coming with me.
Nick, sounds like Jennifer McCabe's kind of friendly there.
Well, I mean, what did we see in that video? We saw Brian Higgins and Brian Albert fake fighting. So John wasn't there at that moment. You know, there's a reason why Jen wanted Karen to go with her. I'm sure there was a plan to rough John up. Now, I don't think anybody intended to kill him, but there was a plan to rough him up. I mean, these two guys, who does that at that age? I mean, you know, I'm 29 years old and I don't even do that in the bar with my friends. That's childish behavior right there.
Still to come.
If you can find a cocktail glass, you know, in the snow, how did you miss a size 12 shoe?
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates continues next, only on Court TV. Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
From these different pieces, Ms. Hardens also locates a cocktail glass that's located on the bumper or the rear area of that scene, and she locates a human hair on the back of that defendant's vehicle as well. Now, the cocktail glass on the bumper, you'll also see surveillance video from the waterfall, and Mr. O'Keefe is observed on that surveillance video essentially walking out of the waterfall with a cocktail glass in his right hand. Same right hand that has minor injuries to it, and the same right hand that's attached to his right arm that has the abrasions and lacerations.
Evidence recovered at a crime scene is significant. Sometimes it can tell a story that no witness can tell. At the scene of John O'Keefe's death, there was a broken cocktail glass. What story does that glass tell? Take a look at him. He's walking here. Look at his right hand. Has something in the right hand. Obviously, it's always grainy, this surveillance video. Right here he is outside, still with something in his hand. So the question is this the same glass that we saw in court from Lieutenant Michael Lank, pulled out of the evidence bag? Is it the same? Where did this glass come from? We know it's from the scene, but where did it come from? Where was it filled with alcohol or whatever was inside that glass? Was it at the Waterfall Bar? Was it somewhere else? Is it the same glass? Let's bring back in our guests, Joseph Krowski Jr., Nick Rocco, Kevin Lanahan. Nick, what are your thoughts about this, the glass that's found at the scene that we see in evidence versus what is in John O'Keefe's right hand?
Right. I mean, most likely it is the glass from the bar. And when he got out of Karen's vehicle and he went inside the house, which his Apple Health data shows that he went up 3 flights of stairs, and Karen's Apple Health data shows no flights of stairs. He goes inside the house, a fight breaks out, the glass falls and breaks. So whatever John went inside that house with needed to be put outside. There's one problem with that, though. They didn't realize his shoe was missing when they put him outside, and that's why the Canton Police Department didn't find his shoe at 6 in the morning with 4 inches of snow on the ground. They found his shoe at 6 p.m. with a foot of snow on the ground. So if you can find a cocktail glass, you know, in the snow, how did you miss a size 12 shoe? Like, when those police officers left the scene, somebody searched that house, they found stuff, and it ended up outside. Because there's no way the Canton Police Department would miss that shoe. And if they missed it, then the officers on scene are incompetent to miss a shoe that big.
Kevin Lanahan, what are your thoughts about the glass in John O'Keefe's hand? Is that what caused all those cuts on his arm?
I don't know about that, but could you freeze it for just a moment on that, the video of it right outside the bar? And so meanwhile, I don't think either side is going to dispute that that's the glass, as Nick said. The theory of the defense is that after attacking him inside, they brought the glass outside, the broken pieces and the black straw, but yet they didn't bring the shoe out. That seems a little bizarre to me. But the reason I want to freeze, if you can at some point point out that little scene outside the bar where he's carrying that glass, I wanted to point out that there's a solid dusting of snow on top of that car outside. And the reason that's important to me, and I noticed that today, is because later on, yes, right there. So later on, when John is in the yard, if it continues to snow lightly like this off and on for the next couple of hours, he's going to be covered in a light layer of snow in an area where there's no street light. And so somebody walking or driving on that street, their peripheral vision is not going to really catch something that's lying still, that's partly black and partly covered in snow, and is surrounded by other objects to distract your peripheral vision, such as the flagpole, the fire hydrant, the bushes, the trees, and that kind of stuff.
Joseph Krowski Jr. Joseph, what do you how significant is the cocktail glass in all of this?
Really significant because, again, the Furman effect with Trooper Proctor, and we probably need a whole episode to get into that. But there's a suggestion that he planted evidence, including the taillight. He would not have known when he first got to the scene that there would be video surveillance taken from the Waterfall Bar and Grill depicting John O'Keefe carrying a glass that most likely is the same glass from the bar. So now the theory has to stretch to he planted the pieces of taillight, he planted the hair from the head, and then other people in the house took it upon themselves on a moment's notice to gather up the glass and plant it out front. So again, I think the piece of glass is a really important piece of evidence. Again, not to show it was murder, but to show that there is a chance that this was an accident.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
When a death investigation begins, the goal is to figure out what happened and then figure out who is responsible. And then when those cases go to trial, the defense may agree with the cause of death, but disagree with who is responsible. But sometimes they say, well, wait a minute, you guys have it all wrong. That's not how the victim died, and the accused has nothing to do with it. That's what's happening in the case of college professor Karen Reed.
When Karen Reed shows up to court, she receives a hero's welcome. There are women and men dressed in pink cheering her on. 200 feet away from the courthouse, there are supporters carrying signs, wearing buttons, protesting the prosecution of a woman accused of murdering a Boston police officer, her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. Prosecutors say Karen Reed, in a fit of jealous rage, put her car in reverse and struck John O'Keefe on purpose, then left the scene as he died in the cold. Tonight, we are live from Blue Ribbon Barbecue in Dedham, Massachusetts, as our coverage of the Karen Reed murder trial continues. Today, we went to Canton to retrace the steps of Karen and John. And tonight, we look at what prosecutors say happened, and we'll bring in our own experts to see if it makes sense. Then, we'll examine the disputed Google search evidence and the broken taillight evidence as we continue our investigation of the tragic death of Officer John O'Keefe.
I'm here in downtown Canton, which is sort of the focal point for the social life for many of the locals. And that night, that Friday night at about 7:30, John O'Keefe met some buddies down here at C.F. McCarthy's. And they hung out here for a little while. And then at about 9 o'clock, Karen Reed showed up and joined John here. And they stayed for just under 2 hours. At about 10:54, they left McCarthy's, went across the street and down the road to another bar called the Waterfall. The Waterfall is just a short walk from C.F. McCarthy's, and when John and Karen got here, they went inside. And there were a few other groups that were inside, including the Alberts, Brian and Nicole Albert were there with family, celebrating, having a good time. The McCabe's were also there. So John and Karen hung out with them for a while until midnight when the waterfall closed. At that point, the Alberts invited everyone to their house for an after party. So John and Karen left the waterfall, got into Karen's car, and went to the Alberts. So Karen's driving, John's in the passenger seat, and they're on Cedar Crest Road approaching Fairview where the after party is. And as they get to this intersection, there's another car approaching at the same time with Ryan Nagel in it. He flashes, so Karen goes first and makes the right on their way to the home where the party is. Now, the car that flashed its lights also going there, Ryan Nagel, to pick up his sister. So Karen and John stopped the car initially close to the driveway, and Nagel is pulling up behind him. So Karen and John pull up a little bit further and stop just up in this area of the house. And then at that point, there's a conversation between Ryan and his sister. She decides not to go. And then Ryan passes John and Karen in their car and takes off. We've got a great panel of guests tonight. I want to introduce who we have. Joining us remotely tonight, Rusty Haight. He's a director of Collision Safety Institute. He's an accident reconstructionist. Great to have you with us. Our next guest, of course, you recognize him, Kenny Kinsey, Kenny Kinsey and Associates, the star of the Alec Murdaugh trial. I always say that because it's true. He's joining us as well. And joining me here at Blue Ribbon Barbecue, Dr. Priya Banerjee, board-certified forensic pathologist, and Kevin Lanahan, YouTube creator. Yellow Cottage Tales is the name of the program. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Kevin, let me begin with you. So did I get it right? Did I get it right about who was where and what this was all about?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So they get to the house. How many people do we think are inside? Do we know?
Well, at the time that John and Karen arrived, 11 people.
11, okay.
Now, there were a few people. People have to understand there were kind of two get-togethers there. First, there was Brian Albert Jr.'s had a kind of a birthday get-together there. And probably party is too strong a word. Now, those people were mostly leaving as the after-hours party began.
Okay, excellent. So this is what I want to do, because we have our experts here. I want to get into what really happened here, or what one side is saying happened here, what the other side is saying happened here. One of them's got to be true, I hope, right? So let's begin with how she left the scene. So Karen Reed left by herself. We know that because John O'Keefe's in the snow. We don't know how he ended up in the snow. But there's one of two different ways that have been described as to how Karen Reed left that scene. Let's take a look. When Karen Reed left, witnesses say that she went in the same way and in the same direction she was facing when she pulled up next to the car. So let's do that right now. So when Karen Reed's leaving, she says she does a three-point turn. So I'm going to do that right now. Point one, you make first turn. Then you throw it in reverse. This is the dangerous part. Could she have hit him backing up here? That's not what the prosecution's saying. They say he's going 24 miles an hour. And then she pulls away back towards the way she came from, right to that intersection where she saw the flashing lights. All right, so let's take another look at this three-point turn. Now, this is what no one is saying. Karen Reed said that she did a three-point turn to leave in one of her statements. So could this be the way that John O'Keefe was struck? Accidentally. She didn't realize it. Neither side is claiming that, but I'm putting it out there. Dr. Priya Banerjee, based upon the level of injuries and everything else that we know to this point, does that seem possible to you that a simple three-point turn could have done the damage that ended John O'Keefe's life?
I think you can. I think it's quite a possibility, and obviously we don't have the full constellation of injuries released yet, but we do know that his upper body was unscathed, and somehow he landed on the back of his head, right, hitting the ground. So I think potentially at a slow speed, right, if you have a slight bump, and if he can't catch himself for whatever reason, he could end up falling back. And that actually wouldn't have significant injury on the body, you know, at a lower speed.
Let me ask Rusty Haight about that. Rusty, what are your thoughts? A simple three-point turn, I grew up calling it a K turn. You do it at a very slow speed. What are your thoughts about that with a car? You've got a backup camera. I don't know if this car has the safety feature that jams you and prevents you from striking something behind you. But what are your thoughts about that?
Well, you can have a short distance across the road, three-point turn kind of thing. But my understanding, she was supposed to have been backing several feet, 25-ish feet or something, and that's not the three-point turn that you demonstrated, and that's not across the road. But let's assume that she's just backing across the width of the road and bumps him and knocks him down. I agree with the doctor that hitting his head on the pavement, could cause a significant injury, but I don't think there would have been an injury from the car in that case. And I understand there's some broken glass, broken taillight. That's a little bit tough to imagine in that scenario as well. There would have had to have been a little bit more speed than I think they could have got in that scenario, the three-point turn kind of thing.
Dr. Kenny Kinsey, what are your thoughts about a simple three-point turn, low speed, causing the type of injuries and damage to the car, the cracked tail light, which is the right rear tail light?
Thank you, Vinny. I have to agree with a little bit of both of my cohorts here. I do agree that I believe these injuries could have been caused in that manner. And I believe it all depends on the victim's center of gravity. If his center of gravity is level with the impact point of that vehicle, then we probably will not have this. But if for whatever reason it is lower and he ends up under that vehicle, I do believe this is possible.
Coming up next.
Getting up to 24 and keeping going straight in reverse at 24 miles an hour on a snowy road strikes me as something a little bit on the tough side. I'm not quite 100% confident on that 24 mile an hour number.
On the next episode of Accomplice to Murder.
What he found was a dead man and no sign of the two sons.
One of Florida's most notorious murders.
They were now claiming that their confessions were fabricated, that in fact it was Ricky Chavez who committed the murder.
His real interest was in molesting Alex.
Did you at some point believe that you were in love with Ricky Chavez?
Yes, sir.
Accomplice to Murder with Vinnie Politan. All new episode, Sunday night, 8/7 Central.
Only on Court TV.
Back to the Court TV podcast.
Miss Reed was visibly upset. She kept saying, this is all my fault. This is my fault. I did this. And she was very hysterical. And she kept asking, he's dead. Is he dead? Is he dead?
You never once heard her say, I did it, correct?
I did not.
You never once heard her say, it's my fault, correct?
I did not.
You never once heard her say, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, correct?
I did not.
As I was ventilating, I was able to ask, did anybody see anything? What happened? And there was one individual that replied several times, I hit him, I hit him.
She just repeated the phrase over and over again, I hit him, I hit him.
At no point in time did you ever hear her say, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall specifically what, if anything, that person said?
All I recall her saying was, is he alive?
And I asked her if there had been any significant trauma that happened before this.
What, if anything, did she say?
So she said, I hit him. She repeated it. There was a woman standing across from her who I believe at that point said, you're hysterical, you need to calm down, you're hysterical. She repeated, I hit him.
Prosecutors have been very clear about the death of Officer John O'Keefe. They say Karen Reed put her car in reverse and purposely struck him. Here's more of my investigation. What I wanted to show everyone now is we heard in the opening statement that the prosecution says they have evidence that Karen Reed's car is going in reverse 24 miles an hour for 62 feet. 24 miles an hour, 62 feet. So again, as I was at the scene, I threw it in reverse. I'll show you that, and this is me going in reverse, but I'm not going to be going 24 miles an hour, but I am going about 60 feet. Let's take a look at it. All right, I'm going to back up. I'm going to go between 3 and 4 miles an hour. Okay, so that's about 60 feet. Now, I was going 4 miles an hour, so now we speed it up to 6 times, which would be about 24 miles an hour, if my math is right.
We shouldn't rely on that.
Yeah. Let me ask you, as we watch this, and I don't, you know, take what you want from it. Let me ask you, Rusty Haight, about 24 miles an hour in reverse for 60 feet. What questions do you have about that? What would you expect to see if some level of contact was made with someone at that speed?
Well, my understanding is the other difference between that and what you did was there's supposed to be snow on the road. Getting up to 24 and keeping going straight in reverse at 24 miles an hour on a snowy road strikes me as something a little bit on the tough side. But that notwithstanding, the other thing that catches my eye is in some of the literature, there's supposed to be specifically 24.2 miles an hour, which suggests perhaps they have something from the car's event data recorder. But this kind of car requires a pretty good impact to have recorded an event, to record data associated with some sort of impact. And it's tough to imagine that with a pedestrian, with a body, and especially to the back end of the car. So I'm not quite 100% confident on that 24 mile an hour number.
All right, Dr. Kenny Kinsey, I've got something else I want to show you. So I did go to the scene and drive 24 miles an hour, but I drove it straight because I wasn't going to do it going backwards. Let's take a look at that. All right, what I'm going to do is drive 24 miles an hour, just to give you an idea of how fast that is over the course of 60 feet, which isn't that far. Here we go. I'm now going 26 miles an hour, but it took me a while to get that fast. Okay, now we're going to show you the video in reverse. Let's take a look. Again, so we can see what 24 miles an hour looks like. So let me ask you, Dr. Kenny Kinsey, 24 miles an hour in reverse, what would you expect to see at the scene? Is this consistent? Is this plausible?
Vinny, once again, I've got to say that it is possible with a little caveat. It's going to depend on the victim's position, and it's certainly going to depend on when the driver of that vehicle applied brakes and changed the momentum. Just think underneath that vehicle, if that center of gravity of that victim is lower than the midpoint of that vehicle or the area of impact, then he's got only one direction to go, and that's under the vehicle. But I think it'll go back to the injuries and the type of injuries, and if they can't replicate and prove what under that vehicle carriage, if it's not the bumper, as Rusty said, or it's not enough impact for the lens cover to cause that injury, if they can't attribute it to something under that carriage, then I see it being a problem for the prosecution.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Dr. Priya.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I have a question about, would you expect airbag deployment at the higher speed that's quoted?
Airbags are designed for frontal impacts. There's not going to be any airbags deployed in a rear ender or the impact to the back of a car ever. The only time that would happen is on a very small number of cars that have rear window airbags, and that's mostly overseas.
Still to come.
If they can't attribute something to the patterns on those injuries, I see an issue. I believe cause and manner have to be proven before they can ever attack intent.
Back to the Court TV podcast.
No, Karen's not going to talk right now. Thank you.
She just said something. I think she might have something she wants to say.
Said it feels we're the only ones fighting for the truth of what happened to John O'Keefe. And me and my family and my attorneys and my team have marshaled every resource to get to the truth. Just feels like no one else wants it.
Karen, just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do. And no, she didn't do it. No, she didn't do it. This is an innocent woman. She didn't do it.
I tried to save his life.
Yeah.
I tried to save his life at 6 in the morning. I was covered in his blood. I was the only one trying to save his life.
Trying to figure out exactly what happened when prosecutors say Karen Reed ran over her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, is not easy, especially without a video or eyewitness. So the question is, how can they do it? I don't know, what do they record? I just presume they record everything we do.
No, it's not a flight data recorder like in an airplane, you know, the black box sort of thing. It's what's called an event data recorder. So it's very limited. It only records specific data elements in specific severity crashes. So she would have had to have had what's called a change of speed or a delta V of at least 5 miles an hour, 8 kilometers an hour in about 0.15 seconds to cause an event to be recorded. And that's very tough. Hitting a pedestrian, hitting a body. The mass difference between the car and the body is probably not going to allow for that, especially in a rear-end crash. I can't see that any kind of event data would have been recorded as a function of her hitting a body, put his head, let's say, near the tailgate on that SUV. It's just not going to happen. I just don't see how it would be a related event.
Dr. Kenny Kinsey, as this trial progresses, and it's going to be over the course of weeks, what type of evidence, what do you think will be significant in helping this jury figure out what happened there? And what's going to help the expert describe to the jury what they believe happened here?
Vinny, it's as easy, and we like to make it complicated, but it's as easy as comparing a known and an unknown. And if they can attribute those injuries to something on or under that vehicle or something on the road or street in the vicinity of that victim, then I believe they're going to have an easier time. But as I've said since the beginning, since those photos were released or leaked out, if they can't attribute something to the patterns on those injuries, I see an issue. I believe cause and manner have to be proven before they can ever attack intent. And hopefully they've got it and they're just holding it in tight like most prosecutors do.
All right. Kevin, I know you put together the animation.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna roll that right now. And just describe what it's based upon, how you came to
I'm sorry. Yeah, I struggled all summer trying to make sense, like all of us here, of the injuries combined, what we know about the injuries, combined with the damage to the vehicle, right? So John is found 6 to 12 feet on the lawn. Next to him with the grass where there's no snow is accumulated, there are cocktail pieces. And we're told that the only injuries below his neck were possibly traumatic injury to the pancreas. We also know he was knocked out of a shoe. And yet there was also damage to the car. There was DNA and a hair found on the car, and the taillight is cracked. So I really struggled to try to understand how a vehicle could make that head wound and not damage his torso.
And
so
not damage his torso. So
this is an attempt at that.
Right.
This was just an attempt.
He left the drink in the street, which, I get it. All right. I want to thank Rusty Haight and Dr. Kenneth Kinsey. Thank you so much for your insight and your expertise. We appreciate it. And I guarantee we'll be calling you back again and again as this trial progresses. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Dr. Priya Banerjee. Great to see you. This case has two competing versions of what happened to John O'Keefe, with one huge difference. Only one side has to prove their version beyond a reasonable doubt. Karen Reed has no burden. So in the end, the question will be, is the jury convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen Reed ran over John O'Keefe? Or is there some other reasonable explanation? If the jury believes her car struck John O'Keefe, the crucial question becomes, was it intentional or was it an accident? I'm Vinnie Politan. Thanks for joining the investigation, and I'll see you weeknights at 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.